Over the course of my career, there's few people who I've shot with so much so that styles and visual tastes tend to blur together occasionally. My good friend Ben, also known as Ichiban, is one of those people in my life. I've shot with him a lot, both domestically and internationally, and it's always an interesting experience when you shot with someone so much that you generally know what they're looking for in a composition. You know, from the way the light hits in a certain particular way, or, you know, the composition set up in a scene, or what characters he's looking for. Ben's style is interesting because I see so much of myself in it, although we do end up shooting quite differently. So I hope today's showcase of his images in this next installment of What Makes an Image Look Good is a good one. And I hope you enjoy this breakdown of what about his images I think makes them look good. All right, so Ben has submitted 8 images, and I have picked the top 5 of them to talk about. And luckily, he's given us a little bit of context about each one as well, so we will include those. All right, so the first one, Gisha Candid is what he calls it. He shot this on the Canon 5D Mark IV on a 50mm f1.2. He says, I like the candid feel of this shot with the light gently hitting the right side of her pose and facial expression, and the other Maiko in the back, but in the darkness. This is an interesting shot, I think, because this is very similar to what I was talking about with some of Liam's work, and especially in street photography, you get scenarios where images are, you know, the things that make them charming is the imperfectness about them. So one thing that stands out to me instantly here is just the slightly off-kilter positioning of the main Maiko here in the center. So what do I mean? The very center of the image is here, right? Something like that. Oh, that's a pretty good straight line today. And instead of, you know, the Maiko's face facing into the frame, it's facing outwards of the frame. She's walking away from the frame. And I'm not too sure what the original image looks like, and, you know, whatever the case may be of how wide he's kind of captured this initially, but he's composed at least this image in this very particular way. It's not in the direct center and she's facing away. But what makes this interesting for me is the use of negative space that is a kind of play on positioning, distancing, and suggestion about where people are going. So when people are walking through a frame, right, you know that they are traveling some distance, and usually it is the distance between, you know, one point in your composition and the other point, right? When you're positioning your people in your frame, you can use negative space to, you know, if you put negative space behind a person, it kind of signifies that they've walked a long way. They've come a long distance, right? But if you put negative space in front of a person, it kind of signifies that they've got a long way to go. And so in this instance, the Maiko here is traveling outwards this way, but the negative space he's got from, let's say, around here to here is a greater distance than here to here. And so in this image, he's using, and whether this is conscious or subconscious, he's using this visual pattern where he's put more negative space behind the main figure, suggesting that she's gone somewhere quickly, she's hurried somewhere, she's come a long way. You know, this distance signifies that she is in a hurry in some way. The balance of this image is shifting towards the exit of the frame rather than the entry of the frame, which I think is very interesting, and kind of, it gets me straight away, because most of the time if I was shooting this, or at least cropping this or positioning this in a certain way, I always try to make the image very inviting for most people. And so I would have definitely made her face more center aligned in the crop. And then, you know, her negative space probably equal, if not less, or something like that. So I find this composition very interesting in the way that Ben has decided to lay things out. He also notes that the Maiko in the background is in the darkness, and there's like a, there's a relationship between these two people. So in street photography, we look for juxtaposition quite a lot. We look for contrasts. We look for subtle inflections of meaning that people can kind of latch onto and create stories about. That is the essence of storytelling in photography. Storytelling in photography is not a very literal thing. Like, hey, I'm telling you like a beginning, middle, and end in a full kind of 2,000 word essay, right? It is the slight intonations of things. In this instance, right, it is the other person disappearing into the darkness, disappearing into what looks like, another kind of house, right? And then her expression going out of the house kind of gives you clues about what the story could potentially be, even though this image was taken in a fraction of a second, right? So the storytelling portion, I think, in this image, this might go in the background, really gives this image a lot of context for you to be able to create your own story about what is going on in this composition. If this was just, a regular door without the other Maiko here, that story is completely different to having her here. So next time you're taking a photo, think about how you can add certain elements to your composition to give that story a little bit more richness and a little bit more vibe. In this instance, especially in street photography, you get what you get, and sometimes you can't control the variables. But in this instance, I'm sure he's had, a bunch of, and I know how Ben shoots, he's going to go bah, 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 and like burst fire all of these different images in the same scene. So he would have got a composition where there was no one in the background. And maybe this Maiko here would have been, a little bit further down the road, and she would have been isolated from this one in the background. And so that is a different vibe, a different story to the one that he's chosen to show us today. As a very small thing, not sure that he noticed or not, but he's also framed the head of the Maiko like perfectly in this background box here. This is something that I look for all the time. Is like, how can I frame heads of people in objects and shapes and stuff like that, just to make things a little bit more visually interesting and a little bit more visually balanced and centered in some way. But yeah, great job. Street photography is super, super hard, and to get something like this is, you have to have a lot of skill to be able to be ready for something like this. So definitely good job. All right, the next one, this one's an interesting one. So he calls this one Hokkaido Family, and he shot this on the Canon EOS R with the 85mm f1.4. And he says that the part of street photography that I like the most is the random but never to be repeated moments just like this. It's just a wholesome family / core memory moment in a snowy backdrop. I like the parents' colorful backpacks, the lamp spotlighting, and how the family are holding hands. The way that the kid is held up, stepping with one foot, looks like he or she is having fun. And he also says that you should have come out that night, bro. So I remember this night pretty well. This was Asahikawa, I'm pretty sure, in Hokkaido. I'd come back from a trip myself and joined up with them on a Hokkaido trip, and I was buggered. And so I was like, I'll just stay at home in the hotel, and then you guys can go out and shoot at night. And so Ben and my other mate Dan went out to go shoot, and they came back with this. And I remember Ben showing me this, and I was like, damn, this is such a cool moment. This is a great shot. This is one of my favorite of Ben's shots, and I think that it is because for me, I'm always looking out for, especially in street photography, for, what I kind of envision as like tender moments, moments where you have parents looking after their children, or, you have animals, dogs, or something like that, or something that is a subject that makes the composition feel more warm, especially and I mean emotionally warm. I don't mean like actually physically warm. It's obviously like in the snow in Hokkaido, right? But there's a tenderness to this image that I really, really enjoy. And I look out for this as much as I can. So, it sounds kind of weird, but I'm always trying to look out for shooting kids with their parents, specifically kids with their parents, not kids by themselves. But the relationship between a child and a parent is such a interesting thing to capture candidly, and I try and get that wherever I can. It's an amazing kind of subject matter to shoot and quite difficult to find, honestly. But to have something like this, I think is really, really cool. So for me, this is a huge emotional play. I feel so much like warmth and tenderness when I'm looking at this image, even though it is in the middle of a, snowfall. He's used a lot of visual patterns here, but you could imagine the process of him shooting this image, right? He would have gone onto the street, seen these two parents hold the child's hands, and it's not like the parents would have just quickly done this in a brief moment. They would have held hands and walked down the street. And so you can imagine from Ben's perspective, he would have gone onto the street, snap, 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 and like bursted it all the way down through the street, and then kind of selected the best moment for that. And, Henri Cartier-Bresson talks about the decisive moment back in the old school street photography days, where you didn't have burst firing, right? You were just waiting for that one moment. But the decisive moment isn't necessarily about when you click the shutter. It's more about what is the best frame that shows the moment and accentuates the moment the most, right? In this case, Ben has decided to showcase the moment where, and he would have got heaps of shots of this, but the moment where there's a few things happening. Firstly, the street light here is exactly shining down on the family, like literally in the middle of the circle. And obviously he's done some kind of Lightroom graduated filter kind of thing down there to like even further accentuate that kind of vignette that the light provides. But like, it's the perfect moment. And then within that, he's got the feet of especially the child, right, in motion, in a kind of like happy, kind of slightly raised, I'm moving forward kind of look. And that's really important, because if it was a composition where, this lady this person on the right, for example, doesn't actually look like they're walking, because the gait of this particular frame is such that the 2 feet are together rather than apart, right? If you remember what I talked about gait before in previous episodes, the distance between each foot shows momentum, right? In this instance, this foot does not show momentum, but this in the middle, what you're looking at and what provides the tenderness and what provides the subject does. I think this one as well could have been a little bit better, but it's actually not too bad. But this is the fractions of timing and that decisive moment that showcases what's going on in the image. That is like the most important part of selecting the best frame. And this is a fantastic use of the wonderful technology we have today in order to reel off as many frames as you want and cherry pick the best one that has the best amount of visual patterns and clarity and visual communication for the message that you're trying to say. A couple of other things we've got going on here, minor things, but they still add to the overall ambiance of the image. There is a lot of, I would say, clarity, but not Lightroom slider clarity. I mean, distinction in all of the kind of snow here that's coming off the lamp. And so he's gotten really fortunate in this image where the snow is falling. And so you can see little particles, and that adds a lot of atmosphere to what you can already tell is a very snowy, a snowy street with all the snow built up on the sides and everything white on the bottom. These little little things give more ambiance to the environment and more context as well. I also like that, as you mentioned before, the backpacks are, one is blue and one is red, and the contrasting colors are great. And I think it's really nice that they just so happen to be wearing, honestly, like the perfect colored backpacks if you wanted something that really pops and stands out. One thing that I love is he has, and this is something that I use a lot in my work as well, is that if you imagine like the thirds, like so, he's placed the family on the bottom third in the middle. And I do this a lot because it signifies, well, all of this negative space here signifies just how far they have to go, where they have to go. It signifies that they've got some place to be, some place to go. Whereas if it was more centered in the middle or something like that, then it wouldn't be as strong in my opinion, in terms of where the story is going to take you. So I really like that he's put that on the bottom third. Bottom third is one of my absolute favorite locations to place things as well. But yeah, aside from that, you have a really nice blue, darkish grade. There's not a whole lot of colors going on here, so it's not confusing. It's mostly an analogous kind of color palette. Really solid image and definitely one of my favorite of Ben's. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button for me so that I know it's good enough to make even more free videos just like this in the future. All right, next one is the London Tube Lady. So he shot this on Canon 5D Mark IV on the 85mm f1.4. And he says, I was in the London Tube in front of a guy reading, so I wanted to use him to help frame the lady in the back. The tube is often hot AF, so the doors/windows between each carriage are open. I noticed it blasting this lady's hair like crazy, so I took the shot. Now, there's a lot of comments when I posted this saying that she looked mad, but with all street photography, it's just taken in a fraction of a second, and there can usually be more to the story. She wasn't actually mad, and it was just one of the frames I picked from a burst. This is something, I was talking about in the last image. It is one of these things where street photography is, you create a story based on that fraction of a second, and that's what's so magical about it, right? This image could have been completely different half a second later and half a second before. To me, she's actually looks like she's smiling, that she's happy that she's getting all the wind behind her hair. But interpretations are different to everyone, and the story that you generate when you look at an image is going to be vastly different most of the time to the next person looking at the very same image as well. So always keep that in mind when you are doing street photography. The meaning you give to something, storytelling when it comes to photography, is never the same. It is never the same story for every single person, because every person's background, every person's understanding of visual communication or how effective that image was at communicating to that person is always going to be different. So everyone's story is different. So what's going on here? So we have a very strong visual pattern called shooting through. So this is a kind of sub pattern of the framing visual pattern, where he is quite literally shooting through the kind of silhouette of this this guy reading here. So he's obviously put this in the center as well, which is great for subject identification, right? Because as soon as you look at this image, the important thing is in the middle. And then what's cool about it is after you've discovered the middle subject, it's framed in a person reading a book. That's really cool. That's very, very visually interesting, right? So in this instance, the center arrangement of where the subject is spot on. Like absolutely really smart use of laying people out and laying compositions out and stuff like that. It's cool. Like, it is a moment in time that won't last forever. It is something that, fractions of a second. What I would have preferred, and this is so hard in street photography, is if he had just ducked down like maybe 10 centimeters, not even like a very small amount, then the head of this lady would have actually been more like around here. So let me just clean that up. So if the head would have been more around here, which would have given like an equal distance between here and the book that the dude is reading. And that would have like accentuated the centerness and the center layout of the image just a little bit more, I feel. But again, it's one of those things, like you're on the tube, it's like shaking around, like, it's bobbing up and down. This guy here is probably not being still. This person here is probably not being still. And so it's easy for me to sit in my chair here and be like, oh, I wish you could have gone, down a little bit more. But like IRL, it's very, very difficult to see these things and like, have that at the forefront of your mind, especially when you want that quick shot. For all I know, he could have this shot could have just been a one shot wonder and not a burst sequence or anything like that. And then you just take what you can get. But, if I had the opportunity to make that adjustment, then that's what I would have done. But again, street photography is one of those weird and wonderful things where the imperfections in images are a lot of what makes that image beautiful too. So, having super technically perfect images doesn't necessarily yield the best communication in some instances. And in, an instance like this is way more than enough to get the point across of what's happening. So yeah, great job. You have to really have a photographer's eye that's trained quite well to be able to be like, oh, that lady's hair is going crazy, and then to be like instantly, okay, this guy is reading this book, I'm going to shoot through that. And so yeah, very good job here. Alrighty, the next image is Shanghai Bund, shot on the DJI Mavic Pro 2. So he says, one of those pinch me moments. I was hoping for fog and got lucky this morning. The fog really helps accentuate the light, height, and shadows cast from the skyscrapers. I also like the faint silhouettes of the buildings into the distance at the back. Yeah, this is interesting. And I picked it because last week we had Dan on the show, and he also took a photo of this exact skyscraper, stack, although he took a mirror image version of it. And I think it's interesting, again, you can always go to the same location that someone else has been to and walk away with completely different images. And so that's why I wanted to choose this one to showcase the visual differences between Ben's version here with a drone and Dan's version last week with a mirror image. Two completely different images, same place. Sure, different times of day and different moments in time, blah, blah, blah. But, people's interpretation is always going to be different. With this image, for me, it is a very simple image in the sense that this is a showcase of Shanghai. This is an image, a cityscape image that is celebrating just how amazingly beautiful this city is, this skyline specifically is. In this image, it's simple, but then in terms of like emotion and meaning and those kind of things, but it is quite complex in terms of visual patterns going on here. So let's dive into a couple of those. The biggest of which is the use of shadow. So you obviously have all of the, the city, buildings, skyscrapers and stuff like that, lovely kind of dark, portions of the backlit city here. But then more importantly, you've got all of this just ridiculously hard contrast lines that are cast. Like these shadows are just so defined and so lovely to see. Especially, you don't get to see drones are everywhere right now, right? But you don't get to see stuff like this happen very often. And he's just managed to get the perfect timing. So the sun is obviously pretty low on the horizon, might be here or something like that. And so it's casting all the shadows this way. And the fog that he's managed to get accentuates the shadows so much. It makes it look so dreamy and wispy, but it gives the shadows shape and dimension, right? Not only are they super hard and harsh here, especially as the sunlight is direct, right? But as the light kind of, bounces a little bit, you get all of these like just amazing gradients of shadow. Like even here, all of these like these rays over here and all of these this is like conditions that like he mentioned this himself, he says one of those pinch me moments. This is one of those conditions where as a landscape photographer, as a cityscape photographer, as a scapes photographer, you wish Mother Nature would just for once be on your side and like give you these just amazing, conditions. And again, like I said in Dan's video, you got to be in it to win it. You never know if you get these conditions. And honestly, from the air, especially when it comes to drones, you have an idea of what it might look like, but you never truly know until you actually get out there and get up there. And so, yeah, I think this is such a great celebration of the city, and he's got this combination of visual patterns that look so cool with all of it. He's made it also quite almost grayscale. There is like a strong like sepia vibe going on here, slight yellows, slight oranges to signify that it is the light coming from the sun. But aside from that, just very, very mild blues in the shadows, if that. And then there's no other color going on in the image at all. And I don't think it needs it. It could be a black and white even, and you could then crank up those shadows and that highlight even more if you wanted to. But yeah, this is lovely. All of these like little buildings in the background and stuff like that. Look at that. Like it's just, these conditions are like, it's like a landscape photographer's dream. Like you have to. It's one of those situations where luck is preparedness meets opportunity. Like if you are not skilled enough to take this image, but this opportunity presents itself to you, and then you look on the situation like a couple of years in the future or whatever, and you're like, I wish like I had shot it this way. I wish I had shot it this way, blah, blah, blah. Because events like this don't happen very often. And you, especially if you're a visitor, a tourist to a place you've never been before, that could be a once in a lifetime shot for you. And so, upskilling yourself and being ready for that moment and being there for that moment to appear is the essence of luck. So, I think he's obviously got the skill to be able to capture this image in this way. It's perfect as it is, good job to him. But yeah, otherwise, this is great. I don't really have any other critique on it aside from the fact that I also wish I was there with these conditions as well. Alrighty, the last one here is called Hakushi Shrine. So he shot this on the Canon 5D Mark IV on the 24-105 f4. And then he says, "You are literally in this photo. Haha. What do you think / remember?" Yes, that dude down here is me. More on that in just a second. But he says, "I do recall it was quite dark by the time we shot this as we lost a lot of light and the trees / mountains do block out a lot of it. There were gusts of wind which blew the snow off the leaves of the trees, and I waited for this and burst fired to get more snow in the foreground and throughout the image." This image is one of Ben's most viral images. I feel like every single year at some point on Instagram, someone reposts this and then it just goes and does the circuits and spreads around like wildfire. So, I've got my own version of this, although I'm not in it. But this is like, it's such a classic image for me. You have this gigantic section of like towering redwoods, and then all the ambience of like the snowflakes here and here and here, and all of this kind of stuff. and then all the smaller bits of snow, and then he's he's cleaned up a lot of the snow down here because there was a lot of like dead branches and all the rest of it, but he's cleaned up all of them to make it look cleaner and accentuate the essence of what's going on here. And then I'm down here in my black, full black, everything all the time uniform, doing my we call it sad K. So instead of pat K, sad K, doing my sad K pose. And yeah, it's great. Look, like he's playing a lot on the classic trope in landscape photography where you have small people in big places, right? So me as the figure down here, obviously compared to, the rest of the redwoods up here is like I'm absolutely tiny by comparison. And I've mentioned this before as well, using humans as a point of scale, a point of reference as to how big this scale is such a classic trope of landscape photography to show off the vastness and, the vista of a place. And so perfect execution. What else can I say? I think he's doing what I tend to do a lot as well when I'm using scale in this way. So, if you've got the thirds here, and I talk about this in my visual pattern series, specifically in the composition one, where instead of placing things here, like I could have easily been on the bottom third, as I usually have a lot of compositions in that way. And I know this isn't exactly proportionate, so you'll just have to imagine, bear with me. But the line's probably like here. But he's put me down here in the middle of this box of the third, if that makes sense. So this third in the middle of that. And that gives the image a sense of balance, right? If I was instead, I don't know, like here, like there, it wouldn't feel as of a natural of a placement, in my opinion, anyway. There are always sub-frames, sub-locations in an image that make it feel organic when it comes to layout. And I think for him, like doing it in this middle of this bottom third slice is like the perfect location to show off the most amount of scale whilst also being balanced at the same time. So really good job on that. This is exactly how I would lay this out for myself as well. Aside from that, he's nailed the color. He did mention that we didn't have a lot of light. This is our first time visiting this place. And I remember it was an absolute scramble. And by the time we ended up getting to this location for this shot, it was like super dark, especially when you're in a location like this and there's big sprawling trees around all over the place. The light and the sun tends to dip a little bit sooner than you might imagine. And it catches you off guard, or at least it did for us. And I remember, he would have taken this as a raw would have been probably quite dark. But, bringing that up, especially in the snow and, there's so much snowfall going around and all that kind of stuff, will look great with a lot of noise, even just to accentuate that feeling even more. So, yeah. Really nice color palette, very strong reds on the redwoods here, so that you kind of know what it is, right? And then not a super strong saturated blue, but at least a very bright colored snow. I talked about this in the last video, but he's got all these different elements that make snow look and feel like snow. So yeah, very good. Solid shot. And yeah, I really, really enjoy it. I took my own and have a lot of good memories of this place. So great rendition. Alrighty, I think we will leave it there for this episode of What Makes an Image Look Good. And I really hope you enjoyed it. And I really hope you enjoyed Ben's work. Please go and follow him over on Instagram at Ichiban and let him know that I sent you. And let me know who else you would love to see on this new series, and I can work to make it even better and better for you guys in the future. All right, I'll see you in the next one. But until then, get out there and make something that matters. Peace.